Hi, I'm Neha, a +1 student from Nadakav School. Our school was developed under PRISM project initiated by our ex-MLA Pradeep Kumar sir. Among all the organizations, Faizal and Shabana Foundation stood out for their continuous support. And our school is known for their programs, which is interacting with eminent personalities. And I'm so excited to meet and interact with Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Faizal sir and Shabana ma'am. So let's start by hearing about Dr. Tharoor's literary career.
So I wrote a short 200-page biography of Nehru in 2003, which has been very successful and respected, and it's been republished again in 2017. So it's been doing well. And then I thought, similarly with Ambedkar, he's an amazing figure in our history.
Yes.
One of the very few people who have grown in stature since his death.
Yes.
And today it is said there are more statues of Ambedkar in India than anybody in the country's history, except possibly Mahatma Gandhi, and even that's not sure. So why is this man so revered? What did he do? What was he all about? A lot of people don't know enough, and his own writings, unfortunately, are huge and voluminous.
Yes.
No one's going to get and digest all of those in today's day and age. So I thought a short biography would serve as an introduction to his life and legacy. And then, of course, it might stimulate further reading as you found yourself doing.
Because I read Annihilation of Caste when I was in 10th standard.
Okay.
And one of my teachers, English teachers, actually said that this book is about this. And so if you're interested, please read it. And when I started reading it, it was like old English. So it was quite hard for me. So every now and then I'm literally roaming around with the dictionary to read it. But it's fun to know about a person. And also there's this film called Jai Bhim. Jai Bhim.
Yes, I've heard about it. Quite new, 2 years or 1 year ago.
Yes. And that was an amazing film. It talks about a topic which I think many of us do not discuss in daily life. So that was my question to ask about Ambedkar since I came across a book of yours.
Right.
Good question.
And also Paradoxical Prime Minister. This is also said by my sir. He reads a lot of books, so he's the one who advised me to try these two books.
Oh, nice of you. Tell him I thank him for
Sure,
recommending them. Great.
I've heard you travel a lot.
Yeah,
So
too much.
Was there any experience in your trip that shaped you?
Everything shapes. I think if you are a receptive person, everything you do will have some impact. You can't just flit through life and not be engaged with what you're doing. If you engage, it will have an impact.
Correct.
So I do travel a lot. I've traveled to so many places, so often seen so many things that it's difficult to pick one or two specific things. But there have been memorable moments, some of which I've written about, and they vary enormously. I remember one thing when I was rather young. My then wife and I, we were fans of George Orwell, and he wrote a book called Homage to Catalonia about his experience fighting in the Spanish Civil War. And one of the episodes he mentioned was how his regiment was fighting against the fascists in a town called Huesca, which we'd never heard of before.
And
how
where is that town?
It's in Catalonia, or at least he wrote it was Homage to Catalonia, but actually it turns out to be in Aragon, which is a neighboring province to Catalonia. But anyway, so the story that he wrote was how they were all trying, to keep their morale up in a very bitter winter while they were trying to fight and defeat the fascists. And one of the slogans that went around was, "Tomorrow we'll have a cup of coffee in Huesca." But Huesca did not fall. Orwell himself was shot, injured, and had to be evacuated to England. And he never had his coffee in Huesca. So 44 years later, in 1980, my wife and I said, why don't we go and have his coffee in Huesca? So we took a holiday in Spain. We visited friends in Bilbao. Then we drove all the way to Huesca. And we then looked for a place to have a cup of coffee. And I've written about this, how we went from place to place, and she was never entirely satisfied. And then we found a cafe directly opposite the headquarters of the Guardia Civil, which is the sort of dreaded enforcers of the fascist state. And by 1980, they had just become democratic. Franco had died in 76, I think, and it was just a few years after. So we thought it'd be great to have a cup of coffee right in front of and we did. And I've written about it. It's become a sort of memory of how to fulfill a particular youthful desire. Yeah, and make a point at the same time. And at the same time, do some tourism and see a beautiful new country.
Correct.
So all of that we did in one trip.
How old
Just
were
one.
you at that time?
1980, I was 24.
Wow.
Yes.
Right.
What are the factors that you want to change in our Indian education system?
What are the factors that made me?
That you want to change in our
What do you want to change in the Indian education system?
Oh my God, there's so much I want to say. But I would say that to pick one most important thing, it is that we have a system which unfortunately focuses on getting people to memorize things from textbooks and lectures and regurgitate them in the examinations. And I keep telling teachers, don't do this. Number one, it was already out of date when I was a student. It was a bad idea then. It's all the more irrelevant today in
No,
the
today's
era of
better.
Google. Because you don't need a well-filled mind anymore. You need a well-formed mind. A well-filled mind means you remember all the dates, you mug up all the formulae, you know all the quotations from the great works of literature. But if you don't remember any of those in real life, you can just go to Google and find out in 2 minutes. So you don't really need a well-filled mind. What you need is a well-formed mind. What's a well-formed mind? A mind that is flexible, adaptable, that can deal with unfamiliar things and find paths to approach them. I keep telling teachers, do not teach the children what to think, teach them how to think.
Correct.
Because what to think is passé. What was written in a textbook last week may be out of date by tomorrow. And what was taught by you when you learned from your school days and college days may already be out of date while you're teaching it. Give the kids a chance. There's a study by the Oxford Martin School which says that 30% of the jobs in the world in 2030, which is when all of you
Become
are going to be in
obsolete.
a job, are jobs that do not exist today.
Yes.
The jobs have not been invented yet. People are still thinking of ideas that will create new jobs. So the question is, how do you prepare and how do you study for a job that doesn't exist? You can't. Because there is no formula, there is no textbook.
Correct.
What you do is you train your mind to think originally, to think creatively, to challenge assumptions, to ask not just why, but why not. And by all that, as he did in what he set up here, no one's done it before. And he's asking, why can't we do this? And he's finding ways to do it. And that's what the world needs. I think either Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, I think it was Steve Jobs was asked once, what do you look for in candidates you recruit for a job? And he said, out of the box thinking. I don't want people to do the same conventional thinking. This is the way it is, what you've been taught, this is how. I want people who are prepared to challenge, receive wisdom and find new ways forward. That's what the world needs, and our educational system does not encourage it. I've asked so many teachers, so instead of just lecturing to the kids, give 2 kids an assignment to find out about a subject you haven't yet taught them.
Correct.
Have them come and do a debate or even just a presentation to the rest of the class, have the rest of the class ask questions.
Correct.
And then you then tell them, this is what you got right, this is very clever of you, this on the other hand you missed, this is what you should know. And that way they learn far more because they've been challenging themselves and get 2 different kids each period. No one does that. It's not part of the teaching system in our country. So if I have to pick one thing, it is to encourage creative, original, out-of-the-box thinking.
Correct.
But that's not the only thing we need to do. That's one of many things. Fundamental.
We face a lot of uncertainties in our day-to-day life. Uncertainties,
Uncertainties in day-to-day life.
like whether this job is right for us or whether this opportunity can provide you a lot of valuable lessons, or like we just get confused. And as a teenager, even I know neurosurgery is really for me, but still I also have a lot of self-doubt about myself. So what can we just do in such a situation?
Well, that's one of the changes I wanted in the education system, is to make it possible for someone like you to find out. I have a niece in America because one of my sisters settled in America. And this girl fortunately belongs to a system where it's possible to do that. From the age of 8 or something, she wanted to be a pediatric oncologist. She was that specific. She wanted to work on cancer of children. Pediatric oncology was her passion. She was a brilliant student, A+ and so on throughout. She got a full scholarship to a very prestigious university, Duke University, and she enrolled in courses that would help her to become a doctor and a pediatric oncologist. Within 1 semester, she realized this is not for me. This is not my. And she switched completely after 1 semester to rhetoric and English literature. And today she's a professor in those subjects at another very famous university called Rice University in Houston. So the fact is that as a young person, this may be what you want to do. And when you start studying towards it, you may discover it's not for you. And there's no shame in that, provided our educational system makes it possible for you then to switch to something else completely different.
Correct. Absolutely.
But our education system doesn't yet have the flexibility to do that. So you go in and you get locked into a subject, and then you have to go right through the entire course, and you often don't like it. There are very many unhappy engineers, unhappy doctors in our country who discovered too late this is not what they wanted to do, but either their parents obliged them to get there, or they were ambitious and thought they'll do it. They don't like it. They hate it. I even meet in the foreign service lots of doctors, and I say, why have you wasted a medical education? Do you realize how many kids wanted to be doctors and never got a chance because you took that seat?
Absolutely.
And they say, what can we do, sir? We had to make our parents happy. What guarantee was there we would pass the foreign service examination? So we decided to do that. And then when we got the examination, we were much happier here than being a doctor.
So, for example, our daughter, second daughter, Sarah, she studied in one of the best hospitality school in Switzerland. So she did 2 years in La Roche, and she got the internship in Four Seasons in Dubai.
Wow.
And after the internship, 6 months, she came and told us, Dad, Mom, I don't enjoy this anymore. It's not for me. I realized that. So I'm going to do my, graphic design, and I want to restart. I said, fine. Both of us said, if that was you love to do, you take the decision.
Follow your
Correct.
bliss. That's
Follow
what-
yourself. Follow your heart. What you wanted to do.
In my case, actually, I don't have a plan B. It's always medicine. Like, whenever people ask me whether do we have any plan B, I don't know what to say because it was always medicine for me. But I'm a very emotional person. Like, I also get stressed easily, and even academics, exams, I also panic a lot. So I'm just referring because neurosurgery, it takes a lot of determination, courage to face this challenge. And there's a voice of me that says you can do it, but there's still a voice of me that says that maybe you might get stressed out or even depressed because we will face a lot of challenge situations, like a patient passing right in front of us, or like we form a bond with a person and that person suddenly disappears, and you will feel a lot of empty. And I have watched a lot of films where the doctors end up being the patient themselves. So I kind of feel like whether this is right for me. So that's why I asked you this.
Yeah, but you should find out by doing. I mean, the fact is, every job requires dedication, commitment, willingness to face challenges, all of that. So it's not just this. And so you will develop the temperament to do that because that's how you're going to succeed in whatever you choose to do. A lot depends on the attitude you bring to a job. I remember meeting the Peruvian writer, Manuel Vargas Llosa. And I asked him, so before you became a famous writer and so on, he was a full-time writer. And I was a writer who was writing at nights and weekends after my work because I was very young then. I was working at the UN. Unfortunately, I still had nights and weekends. Now I no longer do, but anyway. So I was just curious. I said, what did you? He said, oh, I just did jobs that didn't require too much of commitment. I said, what jobs were those? He said, teaching and journalism. I said, my God, teaching ought to be a job that requires full commitment, emotion, heart, everything else. And then it struck me. All it meant was that he didn't care about those jobs. He was doing them just to earn a salary so he could follow his real passion, which was writing. But you can approach any job without a commitment, without a heart, or you can do every job with a tremendous amount of it. The great teachers are the ones who really give up themselves to their students and their subject. The great journalists are the ones who believe that what they're doing is going to change society. And there are people who just do it because, oh yeah, I can write so I can earn a salary and go home. That's very different. But I'm sure there are neurosurgeons who are just doing it for the fat paycheck and the charges they give to their patients. But there are people like you who want to do it with passion and commitment. That's very important. And I'm convinced, having seen you, that if you decide instead of neurosurgery to do something else, you'll do that also with passion and commitment. Because it's your heart and your spirit that gives you that passion, not the subject.
So don't doubt yourself. It will
Don't doubt
happen.
yourself.
I have a question for Shashi because you're running time. You're a writer, you're a thought leader, served in the United Nations. Coming into politics was a conscious decision or something?
I kind of stumbled into it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened was that I left the UN at just turned 51. And it's too young to retire and too old to really start a new profession as such. I spent about a year and a half sort of just making money, which has never been my motivation. But I was getting $50,000 a speech in America from a speaker's agency, and I was writing articles. I wrote one book in that time and so on. But it was not in itself satisfying because I'd spent a lifetime, which at that point was 29 years at the UN, really making a difference, dealing with some of the major issues that were in the headlines of the world, and leaving my smudgy thumbprints on the footnotes of the pages of history. And I miss that. I miss that sense of meaning and purpose. So when I was asked by the Congress Party, would you like to contest? I foolishly and rashly said yes, because I thought here's a chance to make a difference. Intellectually, I knew that in a democracy, the way you can make a difference to people is through politics. You can't do it through writing and books because you reach a very small percentage of people.
Absolutely true.
So I said yes, but I had left India at 19 when the voting age was 21. So I had never even voted in an election. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had not seen an election from the inside. I had no idea how politics work. And obviously it was an eye-opening thing. And in many ways, there were enough reasons to be frustrated. I mean, there were some things I was able to do that made me feel, yes, I have made a difference that somebody else could not perhaps have done without my commitment and passion and so on.
Absolutely.
But the largest thing I've been able to do, because I've been in opposition most of my political life, has been to use the platform to advance some of my ideas and thoughts through my writings, my speeches and so on. So ironically, what I thought wasn't enough, it turns out to be my biggest asset, but I'm doing that from a platform where I get more visibility than if I'd just been a writer. See what I'm saying? The world is made that way. If you're potentially somebody who might come to power, people listen to you more than if you are just a writer who's got good ideas. And my ideas and thoughts will not change.
Correct.
But because I have this platform, I get more attention, I suppose, I'm assuming.
And absolutely, amazing. Shabana, you're a big fan of Shashi, and she's a quiet one,
No, so I was thinking, you have written so many books, and each book, when you think of it, how do you research a lot?
Yeah, depending on the subject, but yeah. Sure.
How much time do you spend on,
It varies. And the thing is that when my first book was my PhD thesis, which I had converted into a book called Reasons of State. Then I joined the UN. I had already joined the UN, in fact, when my PhD thesis came out. And then I kind of thought, I'll do my job. But the itch to write is George Bernard Shaw famously said about himself, which I cheerfully quote, that I write for the same reason a cow gives milk. It's inside you, it's got to come out. And if you, like a cow, you'd be in real pain if you weren't milked. And so you need to write, otherwise you'd suffer. So I find myself writing. And I was initially writing articles, columns, because as a UN person, there were some restrictions also on how much and what I could say. So I found myself writing even pseudonymously and so on. But then I was very conscious you write in magazines and newspapers and it goes out with the week's trash, How do you write something that lasts? And then I thought, let me try and write a novel, because novels are safe. The UN can't criticize fiction. And at the same time, a novel would give me an opportunity to say what I want to say about my country. So I came across this idea, which I was reading a translation of the Mahabharata, and it suddenly struck me, gosh, it reads as if it could have been written yesterday. It's such a contemporary story. So why not try and make it into a story of yesterday? And so I took the framework of the epic and I grafted onto it a subject I knew extremely well because I was a student of history and also a fan of history, so I read beyond what I had to study. That is the history of 20th century India, the freedom struggle, politics and so on, right up to the present day, which at that point was the mid-80s. So I wrote the great Indian novel, and because I had never written a novel before, and I had no idea if anyone would publish it, and I never knew if I'd ever write another one again, I kind of threw everything I cared about into it. So in many ways, it's the book that reflects a lot of my youthful passion, a lot of my idealism, a lot of my conviction, and at the same time, it's very daring and experimental in many ways because I had no expectations to shape me. It's not that I had a track record or a previous book or good reviews or bad reviews or anything else, as many other writers had before writing a magnum opus. I was just doing what I could and throwing it all. And I must say, it turned out to be a huge success, one of my most successful books ever, and it was my first book. And once I had done that, then of course, there were great reviews, prizes, there was expectations, there was all of that. And then I had to be a little more serious and disciplined. So my next novel was a novel about, where I was, the Great Indian novel was very much about the kinds of stories our society tells about itself. So I said, what other stories can I write about? Why not Bollywood? Everyone is, obsessed by this medium. This is a pre-television, pre-satellite television age. So I decided to go and check that out. And what I did was, I actually went and researched. I went to some film sets. I witnessed films being shot. I saw what cameras they use, how they relate to each other, kind of work, and so on. Talked to some people. But the rest was all imagination. And then I wrote this novel called Show Business. And that did very well in America. and and in the West, but did very badly in India, where the critics said, "How can the author of the great Indian novel write a book about merely Bollywood?" So then you realize the tyranny of expectation.
Yeah.
And so it went up. There are 26 books. I can't walk you through all of them, but each time they're different. So when I did Nehru, for example, I had to read an enormous amount because there's so much about him and by him, all his speeches and so. I can't pretend to have read 100% of every word,
So
but I
much
did
research.
read extensively in order to be able to write. Because to distill a short book, you need to read a lot of long stuff. With Ambedkar, similarly, but Ambedkar is even more prolific than Nehru. So I couldn't possibly. He's the only man who published books after he died. I mean, he literally died writing his last book, and literally the last words are written and his head is slumped on the table. That's how he died. But he also had 3 or 4 books worth of manuscripts on his desk that he had written that people put together. So he published 4 books after his death, which is quite something you can think of. But anyway, Ambedkar was too prolific to master everything. But I read as much as I could, and I read good excerpts, a very good compilation.